sanctificamene corpus Christi salvates, aqua lateris Christi lavame.
Chapter 3. Pitfalls in Company Keeping. Number 1. Passionate Kissing. Remember that a kiss is a sacred symbol, a sign of love that must not be carelessly or casually granted to chance companions and casual acquaintances. A kiss may be the occasion of physical excitement. It usually arouses passions and excites appetites that are connected with sex. When it does this, and the pleasure is deliberately sought and consented to, the kiss becomes not merely a vulgar thing, but a positive sin. Mortal sin. To indulge in passionate and prolonged kissing with the intention of arousing sexual pleasure is a mortal sin by reason of the 6th and 9th commandments. Mortal sin is involved when the kiss is a near danger of committing serious sin. For instance, when the persons concerned know from experience that even modest acts generally lead to a loss of control on the part of one or both. Soul kissing might better be named soul killing. Venal sin. If sensual pleasure has arisen, and there was no intention of arousing it, and no danger of consenting to it when aroused. To experience the so-called thrill of a feeling of joy. However, such kisses can easily prove a source of danger because they prepare the way for arousing the passions. If you are truly in love and eligible for marriage, you do not sin by manifesting your love in a modest and moderate fashion by kissing and embracing, as long as there is reasonable assurance that you and your companion will control yourselves, should passions be unintentionally aroused. And yet, even then, you must be moderate. A brief kiss of pure affection when meeting and in parting is proper. But when your caresses, embraces, kisses are repeated and ardent, even after physical passion has been considerably aroused, there is good reason to suspect that the affection you are manifesting is conjugal, that is, that it includes the physical sphere. This would be seriously wrong. Perhaps more than 90% of the vilest sins of impurity have had their beginning in such kisses. Therefore, since your caresses and kisses, though well-intentioned, may quickly arouse passion and flame into lust, the wiser and safer course is to abstain from all physical contact, which might lead to immoderation. Ardent kisses should be held at a high premium. They should be so priceless that only a husband, given at the foot of the altar, has the price with which to buy them. This price is not gold. It is integrity. There, your natural expression of love will be part of the holy sacrament of matrimony. You may then enjoy the human element of the passion of love in innocence and with the blessing of God. If you are not engaged, it is unwise for you to indulge in kissing or in similar demonstrations of intimate love. Protect yourself and the young man you love by refraining from undue familiarities. They may soon become so, if not sinful now. If you are ready to grant unmaidenly privileges to a young man, you lose just that much of his respect. He will naturally conclude that you are ready to lend your lips and affection to anybody who comes along. Sensible men want the lips that have seldom been kissed. The path that leads to the ruin of women is paved with the kisses of men. The thing that no money could have hired them to do, that no arguments could have persuaded them to do, they have been kissed into doing. No girl is safe who easily permits men to kiss her. The goodnight kiss is especially fraught with danger. Too easily it becomes prolonged and passionate and leads to improper familiarities. Thus, a pleasant evening two people have had together can be quickly spoiled. Instead of feeling the joy of a good conscience with precious memories of happy hours spent together, You will both know the pain of an accusing conscience and the loss of peace of mind. If you value your honor and virtue, you will either forego the goodnight kiss altogether, or else you will engage in it with the reverence and respect with which you would want your own sister to be treated in this regard. Remember that God is the third party in all your company, and that His eye is on you as you part. Do not cheapen yourself by silly light kisses. There is one answer you can make to a man's request for cheap kissing or necking. Ask him if he would like his own sister to kiss any man who happened to call on her. Ask him what he would advise his sister to do if she were in your place. Ask him if he would like to think that the girl he is going to marry someday had kissed 100 men who were mere casual acquaintances. Modest womanly reserve commands respect and admiration. Number 2, petting or necking. If petting or necking is done in a way that arouses sensual pleasure in one or the other, and if these pleasures are consented to, it is a mortal sin. Close contact of young bodies is intended by nature to arouse passions and passionate desires. Should these desires lead to intimate liberties and impure touches, they are serious sins. Those who are engaged to be married are allowed no exemption from the law of God. They may make use of the non-passionate kiss and embrace, unless this leads to grave sin or temptation. Even if petting and necking are mild enough to be actually an occasion of sin, they are still vulgar, common, and dangerous. Never stoop to petting and necking, for it is unworthy of a decent girl. Such actions as holding one another's hands, sitting on one another's lap, kissing freely, caressing, fondling, embracing, and other familiarities are very dangerous. These things arouse emotions and passions that are improper and awaken thoughts, desires, and even actions that are positively indecent. Permitting yourself to be led into serious temptations frequently ends in a fall. You cannot be too strict in these things. Break off associating with anyone who is inclined to this cheap form of lovemaking, for lust is usually behind it. If sin is the price of a boy's company, you are a lucky girl if you never see him again. He does not love you. The reason why a young man will touch a girl impurely is simply and solely because he derives a sexual pleasure from it, a pleasure that he knows is sinful. Would he permit another to do the same to his own sister? You will hear it said, but everyone does it. No matter how many people do it, it is still wrong because God forbids all impure thoughts, desires, words, and actions. There are many souls in hell today who said, but everybody does it. Therefore, considering the passions of men, it is wrong and sinful to indulge in petting and necking. A girl who is free and easy in her manners, who drinks and smokes with men, and listens to and tells off-color stories, a girl who permits a man to indulge in familiarities and take liberties with her, is the type of girl who commands little respect. She may be the kind of girl that men like to play with, but she is not the sort of woman they want for a wife and for the mother of their children. Experience shows that this type of girl seldom marries, and when she does, she almost invariably marries a good-for-nothing. Number 3, improper liberties. There is no love between persons of the opposite sex which does not aim at nature's design implanted by God, namely the bringing of children into the world. Since parenthood is unlawful outside of marriage, indulgence in free love for its own sake outside marriage and apart from all intention of marriage is unlawful and mortally sinful. The only love-making which is morally justified is that of lawful courtship, with possible marriage in view, and with all the restraints of respect and modesty proper courtship and marriage imply. Worldlings try to prove to you that sinful ways are natural and that there is no wrong in obeying certain natural impulses when they call you to indulge in thoughts, desires, or acts which are against the 6th and 9th commandments. Do not deceive yourself nor permit yourself to be deceived. Impurity is not sweet, though temptation and the tempter would urge that such sin is desirable. Lust lures, but in the lure lies death. If you think of a man as a high-grade animal or a cultured brute, you are not going to be very backward about taking and permitting liberties on dates and in courtship. But if you regard your friend and yourself as temples of the Holy Ghost, which you are, then you will be very careful not to desecrate those temples, though the tendencies of the lower man forever urge you to do so. If you defile his temples, God gave you his word that he will destroy you. For St. Paul says, "If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. For the temple of God is holy, which you are." 1 Corinthians 3:17. That destruction need not be death. Most often, following sinful dating and courtship, punishment takes the shape of destruction of peace and joy in marriage. The best way to forestall so horrid a disaster is to steer clear of every carelessness in the observance of Christian modesty in company keeping. Nature has endowed woman with a stronger instinct for modesty than man. That is the saddest moment in a girl's life when for the first time she kneels before the crucifix or image of Our Lady and feels ashamed to look into the eyes of Jesus and Mary. The stain of a sin of impurity wiped out by one fatal sweep all the previous beauty and charm of her virtue. She has not the heart to meet her mother's loving glance by looking her fondly in the eye, but casts her eyes down self-accursingly. Woman's welfare is more directly bound up with the preservation of chastity than that of man. It ought to be her special concern to safeguard this beautiful virtue. She can exert a special power over man in this regard, and it is her sacred duty to use this power. She can sharpen man's conscience in these matters and inspire him with a sense of reverence with respect to everything that pertains to sex. It depends largely on her whether the sex relation will be ennobled or degraded. Man is inclined to look up to her as an ideal. It is her fault if she steps down from the pedestal and cheapens herself. The fact is that woman suffers more severely from laxity in sex matters than man, and that consequently in self-defense she must demand an absolute respect for the virtue of chastity and allow no compromise. A young woman who prevails on her fiancé to approach the sacraments with her at regular intervals builds up a strong bulwark against improper advances and obtains the best guarantee for a happy future. Nature also gave man the instinct for the maintenance of manly honor and chivalry, which prompts him to earn the respect, attachment, and love of a pure woman. Nature inclines him to be a chivalrous protector of her virtue and honor, making him willing to suffer any hardship in order to keep her innocence from every harm, as he would in the case of his own sister. When, instead of protecting a woman's virtue against others, man himself turns traitor and to satisfy his low carnal desires, does what he can to wreck it, he disgraces his manhood, plays false to his title of Christian, and renders himself an object of scorn and disgust to the woman he seduces. A man who takes undue personal liberties with a girl is her deadliest enemy, a robber who has deprived her, not of all her money and jewels, but of her greatest possession, her spotless innocence. The meanest criminal, even if he murdered her in cold blood, would not be able to harm her as she has been harmed by her so-called friend. A girl's worst enemy is this sort of friend, who, demon-like, desecrated and devastated the beautiful temple of her soul. The preservation of chastity depends on the presence of honest and genuine love. He who sincerely loves will keep the proper distance and will not allow the bloom to be worn off the flower of love by cheapening immoral intimacies. True love gives strength of character and assists in the acquisition of self-control. It never takes advantage of another for the sake of personal gratification. To preserve bodily integrity before marriage, a young man must also possess some knowledge of women. Good and pure-minded women inspire respect and make the task of a young man easy, for he will have no difficulty in keeping the right distance. A self-respecting young man will have nothing to do with girls of loose morals, who hold themselves cheap and sell their favors like wares. But it is the height of chivalry to deal with an intermediary group, thoughtless, superficial girls who play with fire. They test to the utmost the character of a good young man. He must protect these silly creatures against their folly and against his own passions, which they foolishly arouse. In order that a young man may keep the virtue of chastity intact in himself and in his prospective life mate, he must firmly believe in the possibility of a chaste life before marriage and be convinced that God demands sexual abstinence outside the married state. God imposes no duty that is beyond our power, and he knows well what man can accomplish aided by his grace. This realization will influence the young man's attitude towards his fiancée and make him feel ashamed of any improper intimacies. Very wisely, a decent girl will conclude that if her lover insists on indulging in mutual indecent liberties in courtship, and if he cannot master himself in the period immediately preparatory to marriage, when this mastery is comparatively easy, she cannot expect him to control himself after marriage, when control is likely to be more difficult. What chance would she have for salvation and happiness in a marriage in which her partner would be a constant occasion of sin to her? The loss of chastity will be a terrible memory in afterlife and a source of painful reproach. Chastity untarnished will be a source of moral strength and the best guarantee of fidelity in the marital union. A frequent reason for cursed marriages is the folly of couples who, under the screen of courtship, usurp the privileges of married life without assuming the burdens of it. Had they abstained from illicit lovemaking in their courtship, God would have blessed them with the sacred and lasting love of the sacrament of matrimony, and its subsequent blessings bestow. Since they love in an unholy way before they married, God consigns them to a loveless life after their marriage. Not infrequently, they must bemoan in their vain punishment or trial of not having children. Nature has its fixed purposes and limits. Once these are willfully perverted, ignored, or ruthlessly exhausted by immoral practices, no regret or promise of betterment will ever restore nature's forces to their productive power. Against such sins, St. Paul warns, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For what things a man shall sow, those also shall he reap. For he that sows in the flesh, of the flesh also shall reap corruption. But he that sows in the Spirit, of that Spirit shall reap life everlasting." Galatians 7:8. When you prepare for a date, you may make yourself as attractive as possible. That is the sensible thing to do if you do it with a good intention. That is, to show that you respect both your escort and yourself by making yourself as innocently inviting as you can. But by all means be reserved and hold your treasures from rough hands and evil desires. Rather die than permit yourself to be embraced and kissed by the men who seek your company and extend their social courtesies only to demand that you pay by surrender to their desires. The man takes you to the movie, to dinner, to a dance, to a party, or for an automobile drive, but you owe him no liberties for this. If you are an earnest Catholic girl, you will retain the grace of God and your self-respect while enjoying the esteem of all good men. You will even make evil minds pause, dazzled by the purity in your eyes, the modesty of your actions, and the reserve in your words. Number 4, the parked car. Enemy number 1 to the chastity of young people is the parked car. With the cloak of darkness and seclusion thrown around them, young couples parked along country roads are deliberately subjecting their virtue to a great and violent strain. Parked automobiles, scenes of passionate kissing, petting, and necking are truly graveyards in which are buried the innocence and purity of thousands upon thousands of young men and young women. Here, so-called love turns out to be lust, the most selfish sin, which seeks impure self-satisfaction at the expense of another's virtue. If you are a decent girl, do not drag down a young man into the mire of impurity by consenting to have him park his car, thus giving him a favorable occasion for sin. Even under favorable conditions, every young man has to struggle to keep pure. God said, "He who loves the danger will perish in it." Therefore, avoid the parked automobile as you would a pest house, reeking with germs of fatal maladies. At the end of the evening's entertainment, do not let your friend accompany you into your home, but bid good night when you arrive there. This will be a protection for you both. To do otherwise at that time of night, when the other members of the family have retired, is to subject each other to substantially the same danger as that presented by the parked car. Many a pure courtship has been ruined through the failure to heed this caution. Number 5, drinking. It is not a sin to drink, but it is always a sin to drink too much. If through excessive drinking you lose the use of reason, you commit a mortal sin, and thereby descend to a level lower than that of the brute beast. Even if drinking does not end in drunkenness, its effects on company keeping are disastrous. Drink adds fuel to concupiscence and increases the force of temptation to impurity. It weakens the powers of the mind and lowers the resistance of the will, thereby leaving one open to sin. Drink has always been one of the shortest roads to moral corruption and is the greatest contributing factor to the alarming increase of crime. Facts show that liquor figures in 7 out of every 10 crimes. Drinking outside the home is usually the beginning of the drinking habit and other bad habits, especially impurity. Many a young man and young woman who normally would not think of lust have ruined their courtship and destroyed their love through drinking. Do not fall prey to this habit just to be sociable. To say that a party without drink lacks good fellowship and sociability is stupid and betrays a low mental status. Among young and intelligent people, drink should be in no sense necessary for a good time. If you really prize your virtue and demand self-respect, do not drink at all. The achievement of true and clean happiness is worth the little act of self-denial involved in abstinence from alcoholic drink. The fact that about 3/4 of broken homes are the consequence of drinking should be an argument strong enough to make you give up associating with anyone who, having a special liking for alcoholic drink, does not know how to control himself. Number 6, indecent entertainment. Another danger in company keeping arises from frequenting burlesque theaters, nightclubs, roadhouses, and taverns where salacious floor shows, off-color jokes, and expensive drinks are the chief menu. In these places, semi-nude females perform lascivious dances and fill young minds with obscene jokes, plying them with drinks and turning them into sex-crazed maniacs. These are the agencies which poison innocent minds and prevent their normal development into wholesome manhood and womanhood, sending them out as criminals to prey upon society. In our day, perhaps the deadliest misinformant about the ways of true living is the motion picture show. Sometimes the scenes are so vivid that, for all practical purposes, young people might just as well be acting in the presence of men and women who are disregarding God's holy laws. Such indecent attractions offered by the screen lower ideals and distort the standards of young Catholic men and women. It has become all too common for those born and reared in the faith to forget the lessons they have learned, that their thoughts, desires, and acts must be chaste, that all near occasions to sin must be avoided, that the most priceless thing in the soul of a girl is her purity, and the noblest virtue in the young man is the preservation of his moral integrity. Many a boy and girl can testify that he or she was guilty of the first grave lapse from chastity after having witnessed scenes of lovemaking and lustful seduction created by much publicized movie stars. Such a fire inhale the flames of lust, and your soul will die. Let the legion of decency be your guide in regard to the choice of pictures. Refrain from seeking pictures that are even partly objectionable. Number 7, immodest conversation speaking. Mortal sin. Immodest conversation with the intention of exciting the hearers to lust. Coarse language which would scandalize and excite the young and innocent. Venal sin. Immodest conversation which is merely suggestive or slightly objectionable. No sin. Serious conversation about sexual topics is permissible when there is a sufficient reason for it and proper precautions are taken. Listening. Mortal sin. To listen to obscene conversation for the sake of the sensual pleasure that it excites. Venal sin. To listen out of curiosity or to laugh at obscene jokes from human respect. Many people who tell stories with sexy content are not bothered by them, but they have to assume some responsibility for their listeners. Things like this can easily give scandal, especially in a mature mixed group, and above all when adolescents are present. The mere fun of telling a story is never a sufficient reason for the uncertain danger of temptation, which is practically always present. A smutty story displays your lack of sense of decency and the state of your soul. It proclaims the meagerness of your sources of entertainment, the coarseness of your ideas of humor, the inadequacy of your means of expression. It soils the imagination of your hearers, hanging vulgar pictures in the inner chambers of their minds. A dirty story disgusts people of finer sensibilities who care for the clean, wholesome things of life, but hate dirt. It dishonors your parents, your friends, your God, and yourself. Off-color and suggestive stories and jokes may be serious occasions of sin in company keeping. They easily arouse passions and lead the way to sin. Make it a point of honor that you will never soil your date with a single dirty story. Say nothing that you would not want your mother to hear. God sees and hears you. Never take willful pleasure listening to a dirty story. If you are not in a position to silence the storyteller or change the trend of conversation or leave, at least refrain from encouraging him by your interest or expression of pleasure and approval. Let him see from your attitude that you are not interested. Avoid company of those who tell filthy jokes or stories. If your friend belongs to this class, you have made a very poor choice. Number 8, dangerous reading. Mortal sin. The reading of a very obscene book without sufficient reason. The reading of slightly objectionable books with an evil intention. Venal sin. The reading of slightly objectionable books out of mere curiosity and without evil intentions. A novel with too passionate love. No sin. Those who have a serious reason for reading, doctors, nurses, spiritual directors, teachers, young people about to be married who need instruction, do not sin, even though they should be strongly excited, provided they control their wills. The greater the danger to the virtue of chastity, the greater must be the justifying reason for reading dangerous books. Even mere entertainment justifies one in ignoring occasional slight motions of passion caused by a few suggestive pictures or passages in books or magazines that are otherwise decent. But mere entertainment is not usually a complete justification for reading things that one finds strongly stimulating, even in an otherwise decent book or magazine. One of the great enemies to the moral cleanliness of youth is the avalanche of filth being poured upon them today by smutty magazines, lewd pictures, and newspapers which relate the details of sexual crimes and divorce scandals. Such literature poisons the minds, befouls the imaginations, and sullies the hearts of youth. The publishers of these filthy, sex-inciting magazines are the art criminals of our day, the criminals who turn out others by the hundreds. Make it a point of honor never to read any literature which you know to be in any way objectionable. Refrain from reading cheap books and magazines that will scarcely be an inspiration to you. Read and promote Catholic books, magazines, and pamphlets in order to become a better Catholic and help the cause of truth and virtue. You cannot appreciate anything you know little about.
Corpus Christi salvames, aqua Deis Christi lava me, Passio Christi conforta me, o bone Iesu exaudi me. Anima Christi sanctifica me, Corpus Christi salva me, Sanguis Christi inebria me, aqua lateis Christi lava me. Passio Christi conforta me, o bone Iesu exaudi me, ita tua vulnera absconde me, ne permittas me separai a te, ne permittas me